Thank you for listening to the Writers Guild of Alberta podcasts. The following episode was recorded in 2020 as part of the WGA's online reading series, sponsored by the Rosé Foundation. The audio quality may differ from recording to recording. We want to thank the authors and hosts for their permission to share these audio-only episodes with you, and thank the Rosé Foundation again for their generous support.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Norman, and I am Programs and Events Coordinator at the Writers Guild of Alberta here in Edmonton. And this is part of our online reading series that we're able to do because of a generous grant, or I guess it's called a grant, from the Rosé Foundation. And so today, my guest is, I should also say, we had a little last minute switcheroos. So I've jumped in, and Karen's been very patient with me. And my guest today is Karen Pheasant-Neganigwane, and you are coming to us from, I got the thumbs up, and you are coming to us from Manitoulin Island in Ontario. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And I will let everybody know that now that I know for sure that we're streaming live on YouTube, if you have questions for Karen later on towards the end of the 45 minutes or so, you can type them in the chat feature bar there in YouTube, and I'll try to peek back and forth there to make sure that we can get some questions answered at the end. And to anybody that is just peeking in for a little bit and can't watch the whole thing, this should be available on our YouTube channel. Basically pretty much after the live event is done. So I will now officially introduce Karen Pheasant-Neganigwane. Is an Anishinaabe author, educator, and a powwow dancer. She has crafted a narrative that shows the history of how powwow is used to celebrate Indigenous culture in North America. Published in April 2020 by Orca Book Publishers, Powwow, a celebration through song and dance, describes the history of colonization and Indigenous resistance that culminated in the 19th century. It shares Karen's thoughts on protocols, regalia, song, dance, and even the food found at powwows from coast to coast, along with the important role all of this plays in Indigenous culture and reconciliation. Although considered a book for children and youth, this book will hold the interest of any reader interested in the themes of Indigenous culture, reconciliation, history, and powwow dance. And its beautiful photos give readers front row seats at the powwow. Karen lives in Calgary for much of the year, but like I said, joins us tonight from the place that she grew up, Manitoulin Island. And what time is it there? It's like dark now?
Oh, the sun is setting down. It's just after 9 p.m.
And has it cooled down a little bit?
No. My room is upstairs and it's sweltering. So I came into my trailer and put the air conditioning on really high, and so I'm sitting here in chilled weather, relieved. Otherwise, I would be sweating buckets right now.
Well, we're glad you're doing that, and thank you for being honest, because it's definitely not hot where we are right now. But so thank you for joining me today. Like I said, thank you for being patient. We've had some technical stuff we dealt with earlier in the day, but we are good to go right now. And you're here to read a little bit from your book and to tell us more about the book. So why don't we just start there? Tell us more about how this came about and why you decided to write it, or that you needed to be the one to write this kind of book.
Well, first off, thank you, Jason, for being here and being with me here as we navigate this. And I want to give a chimigwech, a big hi thank you to Writers Guild of Alberta. I love Writers Guild. It helps all of us, the pros and novices, all of us writers. And I think my excitement part is I've always been enchanted with books since a child. When my mother would take us to the library, to the public library, and I'd curl up on the floor and get lost in the text of a good story, of a good book. And so I used to own a bookstore. I love storytelling. And then I did a dance piece many years ago with our theater company with the Bajma Jig. And so many people said, Karen, you need to write that story. You need to write that story. And I, the self-doubt that I had within myself overwhelmed me, that I didn't feel the confidence to write the story. And I acknowledged, but in my acknowledgments, I I worked with the Algonquin Center with Jeanette Armstrong in Penticton, BC, and I worked with Jeanette Armstrong and a few other writers, late Greg Younging, and so between them and Richard Van Camp, they spoke with Orca Publishing and said, basically, you want someone to write about Powwow, you got to get Karen Pheasant. Um, Partly because I had already had my own column in a couple of local newspapers and always talked about Powwow. Partly because the three main reasons why I wanted to do this, why I was excited. And one is to build bridges. Very important to build bridges, to create understanding beyond the beads and feathers. Um, People that sometimes people have seen a powwow on TV, whether it was with Idle No More, seeing the dancers, or even with Black Lives Matter. You've seen the jingle dress dancers were in Minneapolis. So we see that, but we don't understand. So I wanted to create understanding beyond the beads and feathers, and also for Debwen, for the truth to be known. What is the story behind our songs? What is the story behind our dances? Is more than just some redundant, repetitive choreography. There's significance, there's philosophical meaning. And then lastly was Inatamoen. Inatamoen in Anishinaabe, in my Ojibwe language, means our philosophy or our way of thinking. So a lot of thought, a lot of thinking goes into you see, what you see on the dance floor, what you hear from the drum. And so that's what the reasoning was for me to do this. And so I I had spent extensive time just reflecting and and speaking to a lot of my peers, and thinking about how I would approach beyond saying, because there are a lot of powwow books out there, and generally they speak about the beauty, the color, the splendor, and I wanted to look at it deeper than the aesthetics, than the romanticism and the stereotypical imagery that exists.
And how long was this process from when you decided that you were going to write it to basically April 2020 when it was released?
You know, my first story that I'm going to share kind of touches on when did I know, or when did I start? And I think besides the actual pen to paper, the actual keyboarding started decades ago. It started with my love, my passion with dance, and then the more that I traveled around the globe or around North America, and I met people, talked to people, whether they were indigenous or non-indigenous, I realized the amount of lack of understanding. And most times, especially at a powwow, I go there, I just want to dance. I don't want to be talking to people explaining how that song enters my soul, how that song is released from the drum, the differences. I go there purely to dance. And when I was asked to write this, I thought, well, now's my time to talk about it. And I wanted to say that my understanding, my practices are my own. Um, you can line up 10 dancers on each side of me and ask, what is powwow? And you will almost for sure get a different significance on why they dance. A lot of my friends, they have different reasons for why they dance. Bottom line, uh, our 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 expressions are our spiritual gifts, and we go with that.
Well, it sounds like we've set you up for your first reading. So why don't I just let you to it, and I will just step aside while you read the first. And what section is this book from?
I think I went right from the introduction. I went to page 2, so I'm going to read from page 2, partway into the. Yeah. Okay. All right. The TV Indians did not look or talk anything like my relatives on the reserve. My grandma did not know how to speak English. My cousins only spoke in Anishinaabe most of the time, not English. The Hollywood version of Indians also caused a lot of teasing and bullying by other kids in our city neighborhood. Life as the lone Indian family in the neighborhood was painful. The good thing about television was that it gave me a window into dance. When I watched Hollywood dance musicals, I could leave my troubled reality and escape to another place. The most famous dancing couple at the time was Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. They would float across the floor. Their graceful, their fluid movement was holding me in awe and taking me to a magical place. In the privacy of my bedroom, I would imitate their dance and try to find that enchanted space for myself. Then I would swoop, I would swirl and twirl up and down the little narrow hallway. No matter how engaging their dips and swirls were through, their dance was worlds apart from what I knew. As soon as school was finished in June, we would start to get ready for the day-long drive north. The excitement of being home with my grandparents and other relatives would keep me awake the night before we left. There was also my grandma's soup and homemade pies to look forward to. And then there was the powwow. Hearing the drums and the power of the songs at the powwow and being with so many other First Nations people was incredibly exciting. I urged my mom and my auntie, make me a powwow dress so I could dance too. It was as if once we put on our Indian dance clothes, a power took over us on the dance floor. The closer I moved to the dancing spirit, the lighter my feet would become. When I was little, I would get lost among the dancers, hiding from the tourists who were watching. But as I began to feel the dance spirit, I would forget about the tourists. Those joyful dance moments were breathtaking. They were also an escape from the harsh realities of being Indigenous in the city where we lived. It wasn't dance as I experienced it watching Fred and Ginger from afar on the television screen. It was a time of celebration and acceptance of identity, if only for a moment. Even after everything they had been through at Indian residential school, my mom and dad instilled in us pride in being Indigenous, in being Anishinaabe. It wasn't easy living off the reserve, though. Being around plants always made me feel beautiful. Are we on?
We are on. I'm so sorry. When you started that reading, there was a thunderbolt in my neighborhood, and it might have knocked everything upside down here in my house. But I believe we're still good. If you can hear me, I can hear you.
Okay.
Sorry about that. But I'm going to look in the chat. It looks like we're still good.
Okay.
So you talked about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and you were talking about the influence that dancing had when you were a kid. And I was just thinking about when you decided to write this book in a lot of ways aimed at youth or children. Was that because of that, what you just read there, that because of how you were influenced at a young age? Or is it more about what you were talking about earlier about the understanding and the learning?
It's a combination of both. Um, so if you listen to me, and even when you introduce me, I make reference to being home here on Manitoulin. But yet, when you listen to me read my story, the reality is, due to my parents' horrendous experience in residential school, as most First Nations people, they had made a promise that their children would never go through what they went through, the horrendousness, and that their children would speak English. So they raised me off reserve in a city going to public school. So even in Alberta, most people of my generation all attended residential school. Anytime I'm with my peers at a powwow, most of them I do know they attended residential school because I'm not sure if you're aware, but the last residential school closed in 1996 under Prairie provinces, whereas here in Ontario, they closed a lot earlier. But then my parents made a choice to have me schooled at a public school and be in a city. So, so that combined is what my reasons for. And I'm going to go into while I was living in Edmonton, I was teaching Powwow dance at the Friendship Center, at the Indian Center. And I've taught Powwow dance, for years and years, generally in a reserve community center or at Indian Friendship Center way back in the 70s and 80s. And what struck me that was really different this time when I was teaching Powwow dance was the amount of foster parents that attended the Powwow dance evening with their foster children, and all of the questions they had. They were doing everything in their best way to link the children to culture. And oftentimes, and then that was one situation. And then I was at Prince Charles School, so that's what brought me to Edmonton. Is I was at Prince Charles School, which is an amazing school with the AWASIS program, looking at Aboriginal focus with the, although it's the same provincial curriculum, they take an Indigenous approach to their curriculum outcomes. And there was a powwow at the end of the school year, and I asked about 10 children, um, "Who are you?" which is a standard in culture question. And when asked that question, one usually would say, "This is the reserve I'm from. This is my nation or tribal nation background. And this is the family." It's an in culture question, and there's an in culture response. And so many of the children I had met, and this is a K-6 school, so many of the children had said, "I'm Native" or "I'm Aboriginal." Which, um, I might go into chapter 4 with this as a precursor. Is um, I never introduce myself as Aboriginal or Native. I always say I'm Anishinaabe, um, I'm First Nations, but I generally say I'm Anishinaabe. That's my nationhood. And so maybe what I'll do is I'll go right into the next reading. Okay, so
That sounds good.
pardon?
I just said that sounds good.
Okay, right, okay. Um, so just my background before is I I taught for the past 8 years. Well, previous to this year, with the Faculty of Ed at the University of Alberta, I taught pre-service teachers, and so my work is generally in education. So I opened chapter 4, which is titled "Powwows from Coast to Coast." I wrote, when I was thinking of this chapter, I was really thinking people actually think there's just one Aboriginal person, one language, one people, and I didn't know people think that way. Um, I've been very privileged or very fortunate that I was raised in Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Odawa, and I know my other peers. I know I have relatives to the west of me who are Miccosukee, Dakota, Hidatsa, Rikara, many different tribes. And then I know people north of me who are Cree, to the south of me who are Haudenosaunee, to the east of me who are Algonquin, Huron, Mi'kmaq. So anyway, I'll just start reading. When I teach people who are going to become teachers, I start by asking where each student is from. They usually say they are Canadians. When we dig deeper, they might say their country of origin is, for example, France, Italy, Greece, Poland, Ukraine, India, or China. I point out to them that no one identifies themselves or simply as European or Asian. They identify their specific country. Similarly, when you ask an Indigenous person about their identity, they generally say they're Anishinaabe, like me, or from another tribal nation. And there are so many. For example, here in Alberta, there are 46 First Nations as well as Métis people. In British Columbia, there are 198 distinct First Nations and more than 30 First Indigenous languages. The same is true for other provinces in Canada and the United States. There are hundreds of tribal nations in North America. All have their own unique traditions and history, but they all have one thing in common. And today, most, though not all, have powwow culture in their communities. My family has danced in powwows from one end of the continent to the other, from Nova Scotia to British Columbia in Canada, and from Florida to California and Washington to the United States. In this chapter, we'll look at powwows in different regions of North America. And so, in that chapter, what I did is I did a regional breakdown and looked at the Eastern Canada. I looked at the Northern Plains. I looked at the Southwest and all the different territories. And I explained some of the variances and the differences that exist. For example, and I had some pictures. The Haudenosaunee dance, which is the smoke dance, it's a very specific that only the Haudenosaunee people do. They have specific songs, different types of drums. So I write in detail in that, and I have some pictures. And it's a very different style than because in chapter 3 I explained the I don't know how maybe the standard powwow categories. No matter where you go in North America, there's a standard which is traditional, fancy, jingle, grass, and there might be some chicken dancers, but you would never see smoke dancers in in Washington State. You might see it in as a special event, but not as a regular category. The same with I talk about the Crow dancers, who are the Crow Nation people from Montana. They have their own unique style of dance, and it's only by the Crow people at the Crow Agency, Montana. And so I go into and still the book is 84 pages long. Um, I touch on those briefly. So there's no way that you get a full, but I just do an introduction of all the differences.
It feels like, it's, the question that I was going to ask before was about the challenges that you faced in writing the book, and I think you've just finished. You've kind of described one of the challenges, which is in sort of the fact that you're trying to write a book about something that doesn't have there's not one type of to it. There's not one type of powwow. There's not one type of Indigenous person. There's not one type of custom or dance or song so you're trying to describe something in a way that fits into an 84 100-page book, but you also need to you also need to kind of, without generalizing, you still need to get people caught up on the differences that exist.
And just so that you know, it's 84 pages, but there must be, I haven't counted, but I think there must be 150, 175 photos. I don't know. There is an amazing amount of I sometimes think doing the photos took almost as much writing as the writing, because as you know, when we do a book, there's the ethics or the protocols, like getting permission from the photographer. But what I wanted to do is every photograph that I have, I wanted to know that dancer. I wanted to know that they live the life of Mino Bemetsuwen. They live the good life, which is a philosophy. That's an Ojibwe word, but most nations have their own word. And so I know all the dancers in here, and I personally went to each one of them and acknowledged them and asked their permission, because since the Edward Curtis, or Curtis Edward, when he did those almost, and it's controversial, the photos that he didn't ask permission. He took all those photos and then he made a ton of money by doing that. And so I asked the permission of each of these dancers, and I'm making sure that each of those dancers get a copy of this book too, so that and they're aware. So this wasn't done um, behind their backs and whatever. I wanted to make sure. I want to read this quote. I didn't. One of my challenges is so I'm in the middle of completing my doctorate, my PhD in education. I took 3 years. I took 3 years to do this. And yes, true, for those of you that have been following, it took me away from completing my doctorate. But in one sense, it was related to my doctorate work, because I'm looking at the Inadwin. I'm looking at the brilliance of who we are as Indigenous people. And so um, I'm going to read something from one of my powwow sons, Eli Snow. He's a traditional dancer, and I think this is on page 41. He says, "We have a beautiful life. We have songs for when we are celebrating. We have songs when we are happy, when we are sad. We have songs for mourning, for births. We have songs for everything." And it's very true. That was one of my greatest lessons when I lived in Alberta. And I have a song story I talk about, was songs are not merely vocables. There's specific um, principles to all the songs and when they're created. And so I want to include that quote there. It's 9:30. Let's see. So how's our time running?
I think we're doing pretty good. I think we're doing pretty good. We can set you up for the for your third piece. I was just going to ask about the photographs right before we moved on. But do you have a favorite photograph? Is that something that's fair to ask?
Ooh. Oh, I was asked this before, and then I felt awkward. And then about an hour later, I said, I should have said this. But anyway, what I really focused on in doing this, I know what I was going to say earlier, is my challenge. When I worked with the copy editor, one of the issues was I had so many citations in here. And so the one I just read by Eli Snow, I wanted to make sure and include that. But um, the academic puts in citations and then who said that. And so it took a lot of work. And I thought of my own children when I was writing this book. And one of my younger grandchildren is, he's 9 years old. And of course, I'm going to say this, I'm grandma, I'm mama. And so I'm going to say he's brilliant. Um, I took them swimming yesterday. And then, of course, grandma takes them for ice cream. And as we're driving for ice cream, he says, oh, he was teasing me and making a joke. And then he says, we have to joke all the time because that's the only way we're going to survive all of this. And he was just talking about the current situation that we're in right now. And so, you know, the atrocities that happen as a result of colonialism. And my first chapter, um, Origins of Powwow, of how it came, I right away I talk about colonization, the Indian Act and the past system, um, you know, in the new curriculum, they talk about genocide, or they talk about what happened in Rwanda, they talk about Holocaust, and more recently in some provinces, the curriculum talks about what residential school did to Canada's Indigenous people. It was very horrendous. And just as my grandson says, we have to joke, um, what we did, no matter how challenging our lives were as Anishinaabe, as Indigenous people, we remembered our songs and we kept dancing and we hung on to what joy that we have, no matter how impoverished, how oppressive our life came, how much we were in poverty. We sang and we danced, and you find that with a lot of um, people that have faced oppression, whether we're talking about Black culture or any other Indigenous people of the globe. We have to remember our songs and the dances that keep our spirits grounded, keep them guiding us and nurturing us. And so, yeah. So, do we go into one more story or into
Yeah.
questioning? Or
Why don't we? You can read your third piece there. Do you want to tell us? Do you want to set it up a little bit?
okay, I'm just going to. I think I've set it up by speaking, but I'm going to
Okay.
go. The first powwow that took, this is off of page 10. The first powwow that took place on my home reserve, Wiikwemkoong, 1960. Actually, this year we were celebrating our 60th annual powwow. It was going to be a big year for us, but as you know, everything got closed and canceled. So, powwow culture was quite new to Indigenous communities back then because until 1951, it was illegal for Indigenous people in Canada to practice their culture and ceremonies, which included dance. As well, because my parents had attended Indian residential schools where they were always shamed for their Indigenous identity, there wasn't much Indigenous culture or tradition in my home. And I say that because time and time again, I meet many people that say, well, I don't know my culture. I either was apprehended as a 60s scoop or I grew in the city. So my positioning is um, we make our offerings, we make our prayers, and our culture is alive in our DNA. It's in our blood memory, and it's in the land, it's in the people. And so it went. So for me, I wrote, I said, as a young child, before I went to powwows, my only understanding of what Indian meant was from those Hollywood cowboy and Indian shows on TV. Every culture has ways of marking important events like births, deaths, marriages, changes of season. Indigenous people celebrated these occasions with specific songs and dances. At least they did until cultural practices were made illegal. And then I'm going to close with that. Um, I want to take a few moments here. If we can, if there's Q&A, I don't know. We It's hard to know if you have an audience.
It's extremely hard to kind of figure out who's out there, but I know people will be able to see this after tonight and share it. And I will say, so if people do have questions, they could type them in the chat, and I will keep my eye on that. But the one thing I can ask you, I mean, you've kind of did you've made my job super easy because you've kind of already answered all of the things that I would have asked before I asked them. But are there other takeaways that you want people to get from this book that we haven't discussed?
My other takeaway, um, a common question that I get asked, the first time I heard it was, I used to host a New Year's Eve powwow here on Manitoulin Island. Um, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something like that. When I lived out west, it was common practice to have a Christmas Day powwow or a New Year's Eve powwow. And so when I came back home to Manitoulin Island, there wasn't anything planned New Year's Eve. So I organized it, got the drum together, and I got all of the agencies and some businesses to donate some funds. All of the community got together, putting the drinks, the food for the feast at the end of the night. And then I took an ad out in the local newspaper, which is the town paper here on Manitoulin Island. And I said, join us, we're having New Year's Eve. And I couldn't get over the amount of non-Indigenous people that said, can I go? And I'm like, there's an ad in the public paper. I I I didn't understand. And even though I teach at a university and I've traveled, before moving to Alberta, I lived on my reserve for almost the past 20 years. And I mostly go to cultural events, but I was thinking if there's an ad in a public newspaper, that means it's open. And I do talk about that at the end of the book. I said, I quickly said, if you want to go, you can drop in for an hour, or you can go for the whole weekend, put up your tent or get a check-in to your local hotel. I mean, none of this is, who's to say? I wrote this before our COVID situation, so I'm talking like as if we're going back to normal next summer. Because this summer there are no powwows anywhere. Well,
that was my next. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, sorry to interrupt. There's nothing physical, and I guess that was my next question. Is I think we obviously can all see what is missing when we try to do these things online. But do you have any other ideas for the future of what these kinds of gatherings look like now that they're, I mean, maybe in a couple of years when there's a vaccine and things like that, things are back to normal. But do you have any ideas about how things could look differently? What adjustments can be made specifically, I mean, for powwows? Or are they just like any other outdoor?
Well, a couple of things happened. Currently, there is a social distance, social media, and I haven't kept up with it, but there has been a social media powwow. But I was at Lake of the Woods in Kenora recently. I drove from Calgary to Manitoulin, and took, because we're all practicing safe social distancing, I took a little longer than usual because I was being so proactive and cautious. But I ended up spending I think 11 or 12 days at Lake of the Woods, and the singers got together on the lawn of their cultural center, and about a half a dozen of us jingle dress Shibigashigan dancers, jingle dress dancers, we danced, and we went to take a group photo, and everybody was saying, "Well, don't forget social distancing." And one of the elders said, "Oh, we're in our healing dresses, and we'll be okay." And I was tested as soon as I arrived on Manitoulin, and I was okay. So there's that happened. So it wasn't a powwow; it was a dance. And just to know, powwow is a very contemporary term. In Anishinaabe, and when we just say the big dance. And so the drum got together. There was no grand entry. They did the protocol songs, and then we danced 6-7 songs, and then the drum closed up, we changed, and then we went home. And so that's one thing. And then I was looking at social media, and in one of the reserves out west in Saskatchewan, they had a grand entry coming in front of the nursing home, the seniors home. And I thought, wow, that is so cool. So all the dancers were social distance between each other. I couldn't tell if it was CD music or a drum playing, but yeah, that was. So there'll be all kinds of ways. We're very creative.
And I don't want to forget this part. The book is called Powwow, A Celebration Through Song and Dance. Where can people get it? They can get it at local bookstores now. It's Orca Books. That is the publisher. Right. Is that correct?
I do know in Edmonton specifically, it's at Audrey's Books. and I know that you can order it directly from Orca. We have a farmer's market here Saturday morning, so I don't know if I have any local folks listening, but I'm at the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. And in September, I have bookings with McNally Robinsons in Winnipeg and Saskatoon. Just keep attention to I have a public Facebook. It'll be announced.
Perfect. Well, fingers crossed for the September events. Do you have are there any other, have you done any other live readings or live interview or these kind of video chat interview things?
I have done a couple, and I do them by the seat of my pants. All of us are working by the seat of our pants, so I've been really grateful that they've happened. I'm really grateful that the reception by people, the marketing that Orca's done, and the work Calgary Library is doing. We're doing something in a couple of weeks too, with Cheryl Faga. She will be doing the interview.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's coming up.
And you were talking earlier about your doctorate. So is that what else? That's what you're working on now? Is your doctorate?
Yeah. I am. I can fully appreciate it. You know, I said I was going to be done tomorrow, so these days I'm saying the day after tomorrow it'll be done.
That sounds good.
I'm so grateful.
Oh, sorry.
I have a lot of people supporting me, and I would never be able to complete my doctorate without the many people that have been holding my hand, because it's a lot of work, and I would not be able to do it without the support that I've had.
And we just had a Carol Holmes, our executive director, has written in the chat. She just wanted to say, "This is wonderful work, Karen, and a great sharing of words. Thank you." So she just wrote that
Hi,
in the
Carol.
chat. I just wanted to say it was very lovely to meet you for the first time today, and to chat with you today.
Thank you, Grayson. Thank you that you took care of both of us, and yeah, that was good for stepping in. Thank you. You're great.
And I just want to thank everybody for watching. And I'm sorry if there were technical things here and there. We gave it a shot. We also Barb Howard in the chat. She says, "Thanks, Karen and Jason and the WGA. This is great." So,
okay.
The last thing, I was just going to say, thank you once again for your patience with all the tech stuff too, Karen. But it was very great talking to you today, and best of luck with the book. And
thank
you. So thanks very much. And take care.